Jason Ehlers, that's on the line with us today, has a really deep background in information security and digital forensics, as you've read in the materials that we sent out. He is a professional services director at the Leahy Center for Digital Forensics and Cybersecurity at Champlain College here in the Burlington, Vermont area. Before doing that, he held a number of positions at the University of Vermont Health Network, worked for a global security and digital forensics consulting company, and has been an instructor of cybersecurity at Champlain College. We're really fortunate to have Jason with us. You know, cybersecurity has been, I don't know if I'd say it's been overshadowed a little bit by all the pandemic news that we've been dealing with for the past year, but it certainly was a big issue of concern to financial services sector, you know, as the pandemic was started. And in some ways, I think in my discussion with Jason has been kind of exacerbated in some ways over the past year or so because of the opportunity that some of the bad guys have out there to take advantage of situations, to exploit consumers in particular, but financial institutions and other businesses too. And so Jason is going to give us some insights. I didn't really tell you much about the Leahy Center at Champlain College, but I think that's best left to Jason because he knows a lot more about it than I do, or a lot more clearly than I do anyway. So with that, we also want to leave it open for you to ask questions at any point during all of this. And with that, Jason, if you don't mind just running with it, that would be great.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to attend and to talk about really my life's profession. Um, my background is I've been doing this work for about 25 years in information assurance and cybersecurity. I started it back when I joined the Marine Corps in the late 90s. I'm a retired Marine. I went out and sought my bachelor's, my master's, both in digital forensics or digital investigations, because I was kind of looking for how to tie what my work was then to what what would be useful and how I could apply my skills towards um, I guess kind of bettering the community and kind of helping out kind of a thing. It's really kind of why I do it. So yeah, the Leahy Center is kind of I guess a magic landing point for me. I moved with my wife here from San Diego in 2015 when I did pursue those degrees, and it was all both at Champlain College. And the intent was to, whether I worked at Champlain College at the Leahy Center or whether I taught full time, it really didn't matter. But I wanted to be involved in the academia side of things, and the Leahy Center is kind of that culmination point. It's an organization that is one of the experiential learning centers at Champlain College. There's several. They're trying to really kind of drive into what their culture is, and that includes this experiential learning concept. And the Leahy Center has been around since 2010. It's one of their first ones, and it's called the Leahy Center. Obviously, Senator Leahy in 2010 provided the groundwork for establishing the center. There are three directors there: myself, the managing director, and the executive director. And we basically work as a triumvirate, if you will. A three-person leadership team to define kind of what type of professional services we offer, to facilitate projects, and really to engage the community and find ways to kind of be facilitators of getting our students opportunities to have hands-on experiential learning. So just giving folks opportunities to get involved with, computer issues at a client, or at someone that needs our support, or networking things, or security related things, or we do different types of projects for law enforcement, for other things. One of the projects we do is for the National White Collar Crime Center. They have us doing some research on some devices and some activities for them. Activities being like threat intelligence, data collection, forensic artifacts, deep level research things that some of the best in the country come to Champlain College to do. So we're in the top three, I think, nationally as programs for cybersecurity and digital forensics, and the students that come there, if they want to work at the Leahy Center, they get the opportunity to get the hands-on side. So the National White Collar Crime Center is one. We have a project going on right now called the Vermont Privacy Project, and it's led by a senior level Army officer that is kind of like their mentor or their advisor, and we kind of facilitate, them coming together to build out, different ways of doing surveys and assessments that kind of help Vermont organizations protect consumer privacy and personal privacy and things like that. So it's a really good opportunity for the students to get involved there. And then another one is around a technology that you may or may not be familiar with called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is kind of the computers of today and the computers of the future. So, you can have a smart watch or a smart TV or a smart light bulb or a smart refrigerator or a smart coffee maker, all these things that have their, these unique features about them that, they're supposed to make our lives more enriched and easier, but there's security issues that come with those. It's how you implement those in your home and what are you willing to give up from a privacy perspective on the types of data that they collect or what they're capable of doing should they be compromised. So that's the kind of research that we do at the Leahy Center. It's kind of fun. We don't have a whole lot of, I guess, partnerships yet, but that's kind of a thing we're building with folks as we kind of re-strategized here recently, especially due to COVID, some personnel cycling, that kind of thing. I've only been at the center about a month and a half, but just brought my expertise from the consulting side in to kind of help kind of drive what that looks like going forward, which is that's kind of fun. So that's a bit about me. That's a bit about the Leahy Center. I want to kind of talk about what I did to prepare. Joe kind of already alluded to what that is for what this conversation is, and I'm gonna talk about the CFR Part 748 Appendix A and B. I think some of you are very familiar with that. If not, I'll talk about it at a wave top level, but there's a lot of value in understanding what that document is to understand the compliance requirement that we all have regarding a effective information security program at our organization. And I know that there's different, I guess, different sizes and different complexities of different credit unions, especially even in this group, right? And the document really explains kind of how we have this reasonable approach to what you're capable of implementing. So I'm going to talk about the CFR a little bit. I'm going to talk also a little bit about kind of the low-hanging fruit, kind of what we can do from this meeting going forward right away that can boost your organization's awareness. That's a couple simple things I can just offer up to you of the things we could do for low-hanging fruit. And then if we have time, I will go into the really meat and potatoes of what the CFR is regarding a mature information security program process, and that's around risk management and identifying what those things are, how it wants folks to be on board. And I kind of really digested that. We can talk about that in detail if we have the time to do so. So I'm going to assume as we get started here that most folks have data security at the top of their mind. I see such a head shaking. Thank you, Bob. But I'm talking about like personal and financial info. And I know there are organizations on this group right now that want in their vision, they want to be, this trusted organization. They want to, have their clients they want to be held to a very high standard, and they want this world-class service. So imagine for a moment if the data that you are entrusted to protect from your clients, from your customers, is compromised. That's why data security is so important. I know we've heard about the different types of events that have been in the news. I'll cover that a bit when I go to a tenet here about identifying threats. But the trust thing is really important. And there's a element in the world that I live in regarding cybersecurity, data integrity, and confidentiality. and availability. And when I talk about data security from a standpoint of, how do we protect it? I'm talking about if for example, and this is just a theoretical, that somebody had compromised your network or somebody had compromised accounts on your network, the integrity of that data, when, we're here for accounting purposes, right? A lot of it anyway. If you can no longer trust that the numbers are right, there's a level of integrity compromise that happened there just by that person having access, that, you have to have safeguards against that. So that's the integrity side. And then there's a confidentiality side, right? And that's protecting who can actually access those systems, right? You have the customer that can log in, but you also have your staff and faculty and systems that can log into these things. And it's understanding, okay, this person needs this access for this reason. They do not need any other access. And it's how do we control those types of things? So that's all wrapped up into an information security program. And then there's an element that I think is all on the top of our minds regarding identifying threats. We hear it talked about in the news all the time, but we might not necessarily understand what that means or what those are, right? Especially facing, a Vermont credit union. Like, how does that really apply to us, right? There's obviously the recent data breaches, like SolarWinds and Microsoft, where we have these big companies that are, big into doing security a lot better than a local community credit union. Or maybe you have the greatest, security programs in the world. That'd be fantastic. But there's elements on the types of systems that you implement in your environment, from an IT management portfolio perspective, on how your folks access, your environment from home when they're working from home. They have their computers, they have the applications that you may use, they have the operating systems that they use, they have the networks that they use. And if we don't have a way to, at least have some sort of a monitoring capability of that, we lose sight on the fact that there's ways and there's opportunity for, bad activity to happen, everything from point A to point B. And if we're not really looking at, what those things are and how we protect our systems, we might overlook what some of these threats might be. So there's a level there that I know is really important. There's a concept of threat intelligence, and one thing to kind of, I don't know, check to see if you're leveraging whatsoever is called the Financial Services ISAC, or the FS ISAC. The FS ISAC is an organization that does intelligence sharing or information sharing that's federally led, and the financial services, I guess, grouping of folks in our country is one of what we consider a critical infrastructure. Not sure if you do that. Because it's a critical infrastructure, there are different allocations from a national cybersecurity perspective on how they can put together these information sharing groups. The National Health ISAC, or the Health ISAC, I think they call it now. And then we have the Financial Services Information Sharing Group. And they provide, like, real world, these are what the rest of the community is facing, and these are these are the threats, or these are the different types of vulnerabilities that we have based on our business, the types of business that we run, how we deal with it, all that. That's all in the FS ISAC. So there's a threat intelligence piece that I know is important to an information security program. And then there's element of the people side, and this is from not only just from a understanding of the types of vulnerabilities that exist in your environment, but we have a critical element of our teams and of our organizations that happen to be the most, I guess, vulnerable, and that's our people. So there's a long time, I guess, hacker, you call him a hacker. Kevin Mitnick was his name, and he was back around the 80s, 90s timeframe, and he was caught in what he was doing. He was the world's notorious hacker at the day. And when he was caught, he had the opportunity to write on any technical matter that he wanted to kind of help with his sentence, really, is what that was. And he chose to write on a concept called social engineering. because he says if you can get the people to give you the secrets to the kingdom, you don't have to worry about trying to defeat these technical systems. You don't have to look at them at all. You don't even have to know what they are, right? I can send a bad email to this group, and if I get one person to click, that bad actor is successful. From a cybersecurity perspective, we have to be 100% correct and right in our day. And from a bad actor's perspective, they have to be right once. Right. So there's understanding a dynamic here of kind of what that looks like. And social engineering is when you would get when your folks at your offices would get a phishing email or an email that asked them for them to log into a bad place or a place that's just harvesting those credentials, that username and that password, the PIN, or those types of things. Or the bad email might have an attachment that is compelling to open and read, and it launches malicious software that does all sorts of stuff. I won't go too technical there, but the fact of the matter is that if we don't have the systems in place and understand what those threats are, we can't protect against them. There's a level of, I guess, nervousness around folks that are kind of learning about different aspects of cybersecurity for the first time. But I'm trying to make this not so, we're not going to be, super serious about this, but these are real, and these are real threats, and they're not specific to a credit union. These are things that we talked about with all of our clients at the Leahey Center. It's what we're teaching in our classes about this stuff, and it's what the consulting firm that I was a part of was built on, was the fact that people were falling for phishing emails, and the bad guys were getting in, and they were basically rendering their systems and networks and data and not readable. That's the ransomware attacks that you hear about in the news. And most of it comes from, when we do the data analysis on this, it mostly comes from, a phishing email, a bad email that somebody fell for. So there's a level of awareness that is also a big piece of an information security program. Do I have any questions at this point? I know everybody's on mute, but I did want to kind of keep in line with what Joe was asking. I'm kind of leaving this open. There's a lot of smart people in this room. I'm open to understanding right now if you have information security programs at your credit union, or if there is even an IT person that's doing any security related type of efforts, just to kind of get a general understanding of where I can take this conversation afterwards. Can anybody care to give it's kind of a vulnerability thing, right? To share what you have or what you don't have, but I think this is a trusted group. Anybody?
Hi, Jason. This is John Dwyer from Neumann Federal. So we have a information security officer. We've had one on staff since early '07. And our CIO is also the former CISO at UVM. So we have both in IT and in our, the current CISO reports to our CFO. So we have internal infrastructure to address, obviously pretty consistently, hopefully many of the topics that you're covering, but that's where we are.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else care to share? Do we have exact opposites of that?
Well, let me just say that when we examine our state chartered credit unions in Vermont, there is a section on IT and cybersecurity and what's in place and what people are using. I think the difference, excuse me, I think one of the differences between many of our organizations might be people who have a staff of people working on their programs, and those who are contracting out for that through their core provider. I think that's the biggest difference, and anybody should add anything else. But we do look at that during exams.
Okay.
Do you know, are you familiar with Intrex?
Intrex.
Yeah, Intrex. That's an FDIC program. I can't think of the NCUA program, but that's what it's part of, is the NCU guarantee about the insurance fund. So
Okay.
they require the exam.
Okay, so that's, I did learn that the folks that seek the federal insurance are required to have these compliance audits around this stuff,
Yeah.
pretty much specifically. Is that correct?
Yes.
Anyone else? Is there anyone on the call that, you know, just doesn't even have really a budget for this type of stuff? Or is that just kind of a, you know, me reading about this in a global perspective, and it's not quite what this group is up against?
I think everybody here is insured, so.
So they all have to.
All credit unions will have information security programs. It depends a little bit on the size of the organization, the level of maturity and depth that it has, right? You know, on this call, you probably have credit unions from approaching a couple $2 billion down to under 100 million. So I think the resources and staffing of those will look a little bit different, but the risks are the same. The risks are the same. So, you know, I would be shocked if anyone is sort of starting down that journey. It's just how far you progress. As we talk internally all the time, it's not information security is not a destination, it's a continuum.
Right.
So
A process, not a project, right?
correct.
Right. Anyone else care to share? Okay. Thank you. That's good feedback, right? So there's the element that I think is the most important is about how we really kind of follow the policies, procedures, and guidelines for, you know, what we do. How do we implement these things? And there's a level of, I guess, understanding that I have from with the folks that I've worked for, that it all starts at the top, right? Whether there's a compliance requirement or not, it's you know, do we have folks at the highest levels of the organization endorsing security awareness? Are they sending out, you know, an email reminder, or are they authorizing an event where, you know, security can be kind of the theme? Or is there, you know, any type of robust approaches to kind of get it on the top of people's minds, right? So that's kind of one of the biggest takeaways I wanted to provide for this discussion is, you know, if you're in that capacity, and if you're working in that role at your organization to endorse cybersecurity, send out an email that basically, you know, reminds folks that you're under, I don't want to say under attack. That's kind of a weird, mean, you know, Marine thing to say. But there's a level of threat that's happening right now against your organizations. And just to put that in perspective of what I mean by that is, when I worked at the medical center, we had systems in place that would screen out about 100,000 bad emails a day. And those systems and those vendors would say, we are 99% accurate that this is going to work for you, right? But if we do the math here, if you're 99% accurate and you have 100,000 bad emails that try to get into your network in a day, that means 1,000 emails a day. Correct me if I'm wrong in my math. It means 1,000 emails a day are still getting in. That's a lot. So you have to have a process of how you respond to these things also, and you have to understand that when it's a conversation of numbers, whether that's because you're a large organization, so, you know, you have, you know, a more valuable prize for these threat actors to get to. That does happen, right? The larger organizations tend to get more threats, right? But we have this live activity against our environments on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. It happens at night, it happens during the day, it's happening right now. I'm pretty certain, just because of the assets and the value that you have. It's a thing, it really is. So, you know, it should not be overlooked or I guess, otherwise, you know, just kind of disregarded about what that actual threat is, and the fact that we do have, you know, anything that's public facing on the internet, you have these live attacks happening, and to acknowledge the fact that, folks may be trying to figure out, how do they, if they're not trying to get information out of your faculty and staff with the next phishing email, they might be doing it to your customers and clients, right? So any way that they can get the money, right? And we've probably seen that through the flurry that we have of compromised debit cards, or compromised credit cards, or things that happen at an ATM, whether it's through ATM skimmers, which are, little devices that, bad people will modify your ATMs with in order to collect the data that way, or whether it's more covert stuff of just, cameras that are looking over people's shoulders when they're doing that stuff that were put that you didn't know were there, right? So there's a physical security element to this too, and it doesn't stop, right? If your last person is leaving the door, we want to make sure that door is closed, because we don't want someone going in. And I know you'll have those security systems in place, especially if you already have a program, but just be knowledgeable and be aware of the fact that, those systems are in place for a reason. It's not to, yeah, they deter, but you also hope that they work, because you want to be able to detect when a bad thing is happening, right? So there's an element of incident response to this, a cybersecurity incident response, or a physical security response that we need to have implemented in our organizations, that isn't all just on these cybersecurity teams that you may have, or maybe outsourcing, whatever. It's a requirement to validate that they work. It's a requirement to understand that, the best systems can be put in place, but due to the sheer numbers, eventually something bad is going to happen. It's whether you detect it or not and how you respond to it. We wouldn't be paying for cybersecurity insurance, or, well, that's what I guess what it is in the other industries, if there was, any doubt in your mind that something bad was not going to happen. Anybody have thoughts on that? About responding, about understanding that there's a numbers game here. There's aspects of physical security along with how we respond. Anyone?
So just to, it's John again, but I certainly appreciate the point that, the testing that we need to keep doing, and obviously part of the program, as Bob framed, and Molly, we're testing constantly. We're testing our staff, we're testing physical, we're testing email, we're testing phone calls, because every day somebody tries to call our contact center and is a fraudulent member. It literally happens on average at least once a day, in the 900 to 1,000 calls we get a day. So I think your point's valid. It is happening constantly. We have account takeovers, we have fraud that is credit card, debit card, account takeovers. We have members giving away sign-on information, passwords to fraudulent emails at least once a month. So I'm sure everybody's dealing, maybe not with that frequency, but with those situations. It is a regular occurrence.
Certainly, and to add on to it a little bit too, credit unions, many of them not only have their incident response plans, but go through periodic testing of those and scenarios and different aspects as part of our business continuity programs, frankly, and disaster preparedness practice. So all that and more.
Exactly.
Who doesn't want a tabletop exercise on a Friday afternoon for an IT or data security issue? It's the way to ruin your weekend.
Exactly.
And it always seems to be Friday afternoon.
Yeah,
That's right.
if I can ask, not just Bob and John, but for anybody on the line, what incidences you've seen, or attempted instances that you've seen at getting in and compromising people's accounts and so on and so forth. Have you noticed, or are you aware, has that ramped up over the past year related to or not all the pandemic, or is it about what it's always been?
Hi,
Anyone?
Joe. This is Scott Driver from North Country. We've definitely seen a ramp up in the number of attempts, especially in phishing, as typical using, the news of the day. We've seen stuff around the political strife, COVID, work from home.
Right.
There was the whole Zoom thing that popped up when this all started a year ago. So yes, we've definitely seen more attempts over the past year.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll just say, I think we've seen more like elder fraud and more contacts being made while people have been isolated and trying to get into their computers that we hear about when it relates to money. So there has been even more complaints about it,
Okay. Do we
which
want,
usually means there's been more.
right? Because we only know about a fraction of things, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. So do we have programs in any of the organizations right here that helps consumers that are trying to do something where you feel that they're being duped? I see a smile on Molly's face here. Carrie, take that one away, Molly. Kind of give if you have a perspective on that, or I can finish.
Well, I mean, I think all of our credit unions are working with their customers when it looks like it's a fraud or a scam, and not to wire money, and to talk about some of the other examples we've heard about why it would be a scam. It's to give them all a great deal of credit. It's really hard to protect people from themselves at the extreme. Someone convinced that they have to send this money to somewhere because somebody's in the hospital or something, and those are the most sad cases. I think our securities division was just involved in one where someone was sending money, and they were instructed to send it through TD Bank, but in Canada, because once it's international, it's very difficult to track down. And even though it was pretty clear, because of the way the laws are between our two countries, it took months, but finally, the money hadn't gone out of Canada, and it was over $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, big money. Yeah.
Thank you. So that was kind of the concept of, if you have folks working on these the cybersecurity program, that's great, right? But are we looking out for our number ones, and that's our customers, our clients, and even ourselves, right? Because those folks that you're outsourcing to work on your program, will be working on things that are going to be against that compliance requirement, perhaps. But did we validate whether or not that they have programs in place for how to help the people that you serve, right? Do we have documentation that we're providing them? How far do you go before it's a cause that is no longer civil, or is it do you have an escalation point? Do you have these plans? Bob was talking about the incident response plan, whether that qualifies, and who does that? Do you have people? If we have a small organization, do they have people that can even do that, or is that outsourced?
Well, all of that too, Jason, come under money laundering. So SARs have to be filed with FFIC and all of that as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we have this culture of awareness concept. If we were to do we collectively were to do not a phishing assessment, but a survey of, do your employees know what to look for? How do we think we would do? What's the what's the average there? What's the level of success or failures that that you may be seeing now? You know, what does that look like when you're asking your employees about these topics or cybersecurity related topics? What does that look like?
Well, it depends on the month, but we range from about a just over a 1% failure rate to 4% failure rate. And we send emails. Like I said, we call people. We have done physical, people walking into branches. So that's been our levels, because but our staff knows they're going to get tested basically at least once a month. And so there's an awareness that's been built. There's annual training. Again, this is part of the programs that we're describing, but there's annual training requirements. And then we tell the story. Our CISO sends out monthly newsletters, talks about examples. There's too many, like Molly described, that to get into, but there are regular stories about members having lost money, and that helps us gain awareness within the staff.
Right.
We do training too, but we've long discovered that testing was the key to driving awareness. We've tested since 2014. The testing rate got significantly increased when COVID hit. So we're testing every employee in the organization at least twice a month with a phishing email that's quite good. And if you fail it is a documentable performance issue. A big believer, you can do all the training you want. It's the testing that will get you to very strong compliance.
Is there ever a level of HR that gets involved when you have a employee that just doesn't take it seriously, or is it
they wouldn't work for us any longer?
Noted. They're not even an HR thing at all. You're done.
Yeah, I mean,
Very interesting.
if you fail the security test repeatedly, it's akin to consistently giving out an extra $1,000 with a withdrawal. I mean, you're not able to perform the functions of your position.
Very interesting. Well, thank you. I think that's a very valuable thing. I'm shocked, actually. I see Dwyer. I'm not sure about first name, last name, surname, sir.
John.
Thank you. But I think that's a really high number of a really high rate of success. We've seen where we would do a reasonable assessment of employees and we would have a 30% fail rate, and they're not. We would specifically devise the emails to not be that difficult, and you would send out training that explains the different things to look at. I don't want to get too technical, right? But there's a lot of indicators that if your folks are trained, they're going to at least question it, and that you would have a proper venue for how they would report it. Hopefully, we have folks that have that, whether it's a report button or an email address that's like abuse@thiscreditunion.org or something like that.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with Bob that the testing and then the follow-up. I mean, it's we track the same things, and we do it supportively. But if you're not going to learn from the mistakes, we're going to address that. And we have had people leave, so there is. For any of us who've been through security issues or data, issues, this is binary. It's really, and so we've tried to make sure that people understand it. Our CISO talks to every new employee, as part of orientation. It's they know the first day they're at the credit union that this is a very critical part of our brand and part of our, you talked about at the beginning, right? Your trust with your member is based upon how you handle these things. So it's pretty straightforward.
Right. Is there a level of, I guess, coordination amongst the folks in this association where if you might or might not have the staff to review a submitted malicious email or someone that had reported or seen activity, but you might not have the technical staff on hand to process that? How are folks handling that if they don't have the staff in-house other than the outsourcing? Or is that it, outsourcing? Anyone?
One of the issues, there's too many. I wouldn't say we follow up on every email that gets reported as phishing. And we have a button on our email so all staff can report them. There are too many to follow up on. So at least for us, we don't, some number of them come from me, right? That's true for everybody on the call. Yeah, you're gonna have emails that come at least purportedly from my email address.
Right.
So those are, I don't even know how many I know I get a monthly report. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I don't know how many we get reported each month, but we do not coordinate, at least that I'm aware of. I know our security people talk to each other as part of larger CISO groups in the state. There's a pretty good network in the state. Obviously, you're, I'm sure, involved in that, but where people can talk about those things.
Right. So I am kind of getting short here on time, Joe. There's a lot more that we could talk about regarding, the risk management pieces of this, or even some of the challenges of how we kind of enhance our programs from what they are now to where we want to be. And I think I just kind of gathered a sense of objectiveness or subjectiveness to the requirement and the CFR was about within the complexity and capability of your organization is how you deploy these programs. And I was just thinking, okay, so that could be interpreted that if you have a 20 employee team and you don't have any IT people whatsoever, that okay, as long as we're making sure that stuff is thrown away properly, that counts as our cybersecurity team, right? So I'm just kind of looking at the different variables that go into play about establishing a thing. I see some looks here. So there's areas of operational security, and that's like what you do about people walking through the door. There's areas of how you dispose of your member information, whether that's through electronic means or through physical means. There's areas about how you validate the identity of the individual that it is that you're providing accesses for. All sorts of other areas that we could talk about maybe in a future conversation, Joe. I'm not sure. But the takeaways I wanted to give you before we conclude, I'm not sure why I don't see my note here on that. It was pretty important. Is kind of obviously reminding the awareness, having that awareness mindset, and it sounds like there's some folks that are doing a really good job there. And then the physical safeguards, right, of what I was just kind of mentioning, I think is another low-hanging fruit, is that I just remind them that where you, like, if you have like a clean desk policy, like, do we have information out that other people could see that shouldn't be seeing it? This is there's just I think a level of things that could be kind of taken at as just let's find the simple items here and kind of share them with your organizations from your level, because I know that the endorsement that comes from higher really kind of has a good effect. I hope they don't consider it a spoofed email like John was talking about, where they're like, oh, that's not really him, let's send this to the abuse mailbox. But that's kind of the concept, and that's basically what I have, Joe. Yes, Molly?
I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about the CISA alert that went out over the weekend regarding Microsoft, just, at a high level of originally I'm assuming this goes back to the December event with SolarWinds, which they didn't identify the actor, but in this one, they did say Chinese. But maybe you could do a couple minutes of that, because I didn't send information to everybody on Friday afternoon, because I know you got it from the NCUA, the banks got it from the FDIC. But I did send it out to some of our licensees that are headquartered in Vermont, and a couple called me to make sure it wasn't a scam. So
Right.
they're good.
Which is good, right?
Good.
Right.
I was like, good. That's good. It's not a scam.
So top level, I'm going to assume you're talking about the Microsoft Exchange
Yes.
advisory that went out. So it's basically if your folks or if your organizations aren't using that software or using those platforms, specifically the versions that they outlined in that alert, then they don't apply. And that's a major concept generally in cybersecurity, is that you and you probably know this already, that you have a lot of unknowns in our environment, right? And we don't know about them until someone discovers them and they say, oh, look at this. This has been going on for, 3 months or a year and a half or whatever. Oh, we need to patch these things. And then, there's a patch process, and there's a requirement, not a requirement, but there's a need to be able to come up with a level that of responsiveness to patching that works with your operational tempo. Right? At a large organization, it's very difficult to say, I'm going to stop everything and patch because I had this alert that says, oh, this is bad. This is in these Microsoft Exchange things. We all use that for our email. And I just need to do this patch right away and stop everyone from being able to send email for a couple hours. Not that it takes that long, but if something broke or went bad, that's what happens. Right? So I want to say, just from, my time in the industry, that, if depending on how big your portfolio is, that's either small on the need to respond now priority list, or it's high, right? It really depends, because there's a lot of other things out there, and I guess maybe I'm just kind of numb to the concept, but yeah, we should take it seriously when it comes out on a platform like that. That if you have those software sets or those platforms, absolutely find a way to patch it, and find a way to patch it quickly, because they're the experts. They're the ones that know what the holes are, and they went out of their way to create a patch for it. So now it's a known, right? It's no longer unknown. So now it's something that if you know that it's there and you have a way to mitigate it, it's time to do so. Does that kind of help without even going into detail, Molly?
Yeah. I mean, it was an email. They said 4 different things that they were patching within the email system, where somebody could go in and get your email addresses and then use them for other things.
Right.
But yeah, when those come out and they're labeled red, they're big.
Right. So maybe we could have another conversation in the future about, kind of what the vulnerability management aspects are. I did it in a kind of the primary role at the medical center for some time, about how we identify what those are. Because, next month we could have something come out from, the vendor that supports all of your networks, and say, oh my gosh, we found this hole. It's been going on for years. Now patch this stuff. So now you have a single person that's trying to work on patching. Which one do you do? So it becomes a risk conversation about, managing the risk, understanding how the vulnerability plays into each environment. There's a whole level of conversation that can go on that, but that's basically the concept, is, being aware of what those things are, patching the things you can, and then, moving forward and being prepared for the next one.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more of that as well, judging by how quickly they've had 2 or 3 coming out lately.
Right. Right. And the more complex your environment, the more stuff you have, and then the more awareness you have, the more times you see someone come out with an update. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what is it? Microsoft has something like 180,000 clients or something. I mean, it's a gigantic number. So,
right.
Yeah, when it affects people we're talking to, at us, and who we're talking to, probably.
Right. So there's elements of even like kind of how we respond to those types of things, right? It's like, because if someone's in your environment through that channel or through that vector, right, and now you're talking about it, now they know to like bounce somewhere else, right? So there's this idea and this concept in response about responding out of band, right? You don't use the same email that you're using if you're in a compromised environment. You use your own personal email or use another way to communicate about those things, right? There's a whole lot. There's an entire industry based on that type of approach to stuff that we don't have time for, or necessarily even the need to talk about a lot of that here. But I would be very happy to kind of talk about kind of how we can manage vulnerabilities and how we can look at them from a risk calculation perspective, specifically using like the common vulnerability scoring system, the CVSS system. Because those types of things, then they instill a bit of fear or a sense of urgency. But then you look at them holistically and it's like, oh, well, one, I don't use that asset. If you don't have the asset, then you have, the threat times the vulnerability. But if it's times zero because the asset's zero, then you don't have risk, right? That kind of sounds, so it's understanding your environment. It's understanding what the threats are against your environment.
Oh, yeah.
It's understanding what assets you have, and understanding, and if you have those three things, you can figure out the types of risks that are against you, and then putting everything into context and figure out where your priority lies and what your risk posture and your risk appetite are. So that's a long story short of some of the stuff we're going to go into, but I think I'm up on time, Joe.
Any other comments or questions for Jason from anybody? You want to cut the discussion?
I have one. I'm sure that John and Bob, do you guys have cybersecurity insurance?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And how about a smaller CU? Does almost everybody have that now?
I don't know, Molly. I know that it's
Dean or-
through CUNA Mutual.
This is-
So they can
Oh,
get
it is.
it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is Wanda Dunham. We do have it here.
Yep, great.
So I know there's an element from a cyber insurance perspective, Molly, because that was also the folks that we worked for in that consulting firm, is that there's a level of compliance, or at least a level of, are you taking care of yourself before they'll even cover certain incidents?
Yeah.
And then it's up to a certain level, which means that you have to have the security controls in place to make sure that it doesn't affect all of your levels, right? So there's just kind of ways to kind of enter and, to invite cyber insurance just from a risk transference perspective, is that it's still your problem, but you can't, and like there were government organizations that were, just paying the ransom because it was like an expense that they just decided to write it off as, and no longer, something that they wanted to put money into towards preventing, but just kind of accepting. Obviously cyber insurance firms don't want you to do that. So.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
Joe.
bringing that up.
Thank you, Molly, for bringing that up. And thank you, Jason, for spending this time with us today. It's been a pleasure hearing from you, and I hope everyone got something insightful out of this discussion. Before we wrap up, how can anyone on the line that wants to know a little bit more about what the Leahey Center that you work at does and what it might be able to provide for a credit union on the line or any other organization?
Quite honestly, our website's under construction. I don't want to give that URL out, but maybe I can give you something offline, Joe, that you can distribute to the group.
Sure.
On ways to kind of,
and even just an email to you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Absolutely. So we have that email from. Well, maybe we don't. But I am Jay Ehlers. So first initial of my first name and my last name at champlain.edu. That's CHAMPLAIN.edu. Might have said that quickly. I apologize. But Champlain College, so it's champlain.edu. But yeah, and then I take, just identify who you are, or I'll find out. Right, I do investigative things on my own. Just throw me your question, and if it's something that maybe the whole group wants to know about, and you feel comfortable, that I can talk with Joe and maybe come on another one of these calls for you.
Great, thank you, Jason. Thanks
Very
very
welcome.
So a couple parting comments really quick for everyone's benefit. You are aware from the press that the Vermont legislature went back into session or goes back into the session tomorrow. This is Friday of this week is crossover date, so that means any legislation that doesn't make it out of committee, out of one chamber this week is dead for the rest of the session and has to sit in committee until the beginning of the next session. They're probably going to, from what I think we reported out in an update earlier today, expect the Vermont legislature to probably extend beyond its typical May adjournment date into the summer. Maybe a little bit different than what it did last year, but they're going to be working on how to allocate that $1.25 billion that is going to come to Vermont from the legislation that the House is voting on. Was it today or tomorrow? Tomorrow, I think it is. The House and Congress voting on that 1.9 trillion relief bill. And Bernie and Patrick were both very instrumental in raising that threshold to get 101.25 billion to Vermont. That's the lowest level that any state's going to get. So kudos to them for doing that, and their positions as chairs of influential money committees probably don't hurt. Also, sometime this week, there's some hearings going on, but we're probably going to end up by the end of this week or into next week with a new director of the CFPB. So I'm sure there'll be some news about that coming up that will be of interest to financial institutions. And the last thing I want to mention to you is that we've had 82 lieutenant governors in the state of Vermont. And next week in this time slot, we will have the 4th female lieutenant governor in Vermont, Molly Gray, who will be joining us for this discussion. So I hope that you all join me in meeting Molly this time next week. I look forward to it and hope you all do too. Thank you very much for spending time with us this afternoon. We very much appreciate it and hope you have a great week.